This is a case of murder and mystery and intrigue.
A brutal killing.
It was the body of a female wrapped in about 200 pounds of chain with a plastic bag over the head.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
This person may know something that they're trying to withhold, and they're scared to talk now.
She was tricked, threatened, coerced.
There's an urban legend there was about $500,000 in cash that went missing.
Maybe he got upset, lost his temper, went back over there and killed her.
The truth will be revealed.
Whoever went to these elaborate extremes to make this woman disappear wanted her gone and never to be seen again.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Five miles down the Mississippi River from New Orleans sits the quiet community of St. Bernard, Louisiana.
St. Bernard being so close to New Orleans, being so close proximity to the river and the traffic on the river, and just the multiculture attracts people here.
People are friendly and open. You know somebody who knows somebody who knows that person. It is a small community.
This familiarity can also create a false sense of security.
Some fishermen report they had found a body in one of their lines.
A female wrapped in some sort of chains. She had, I think, a cord or something wrapped around her neck.
The body was in an advanced state of decomposition. She was dressed only in a nightshirt. After an extensive check of medical records and some identification of her jewelry, they were able to positively identify her.
She's named as 61-year-old Dorothy Thompson.
She'd been missing for about 3 weeks prior to that.
But at the time, police weren't able to go forward with it. They could not continue their investigation.
Dorothy's murder remains a mystery for 18 years, until St. Bernard natives, Colonel John Doran and Lieutenant Mark Jackson decide to take it on.
I remember it so well because it was a big deal for St. Bernard. When I was about 15 years old, some friends of mine and I hustled a little job cutting grass at a pet cemetery. And I remember that lady that owned it. Dorothy was a bit of a recluse, kind of an eccentric type person. I don't think she was particularly in good health. But by all accounts, she was a generous person, a sweet person.
Dorothy's house sat way back off the highway, so you'd have to drive back kind of a secluded driveway to get to her house through some wooded area. They had pet tombstones across the whole front of the property. They had birds, cats, dogs, All sorts of animals. Any animal you could think of was buried in that pet cemetery. Back when I was young, the word around the community was that it was like a haunted house. People would go down there and say they seen ghosts and stuff like that around the property. It was a strange place, to say the least.
Almost everybody in St. Bernard Parish knew about the pet cemetery.
When we dug through the case file, we didn't have a lot left because when we reopened the case, it was a few years after Hurricane Katrina. St. Bernard was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. Before the storm, they had evidence. They had the chains that she was wrapped in. They had the cord that she had wrapped around her neck. All that was lost. So it was kind of starting from scratch.
One of the few salvageable documents is Dorothy's autopsy report.
The coroner ruled that it was a probable asphyxia or suffocation. Well, she either died from being strangled or from that plastic bag being placed over her head where she couldn't breathe. So it could have been a combination of the two.
Asphyxiation is a method to inflict your anger and frustration at this person while they're dying. That indicates that there's some personal involvement and that there was some anger by the alleged perpetrator.
To me, that was a premeditated, deliberate act. Whoever went to these elaborate extremes to make this woman disappear wanted her gone and never to be seen again.
As detectives unravel the past, they learn this isn't the first death police have investigated on this property.
We discovered that Dorothy's first husband died of a gunshot wound. The story was that it was a self-defense, that he was beating Dorothy and Dorothy shot him. And her second husband committed suicide on the back porch of the house.
The gruesome nature of these incidents leave police wondering if there's a connection.
When you have some history in the family of someone else that may have been murdered, you start thinking that maybe there's something going on in this family. Are there family issues? Are there control issues? Are there property issues?
When you think there's something suspicious here, you have to do an awful lot of research into learning your victim. You're often looking for the one person you can ask questions of that gives context or gives information that's relatively unbiased.
They begin to reconstruct Dorothy's timeline, aiming to identify the people she interacted with in her final 24 hours.
The first thing we did when we reopened it is establish the timeline. That's the very first thing I had to do to piece it back together. You have to find out when was the last time this person was seen or heard from, and who were they with.
They track down the woman who originally reported Dorothy missing.
Patricia Newman, she was in her early 30s. She did a lot of volunteer work in the community, particularly at hospitals, helping elderly people. She befriended Dorothy and started to take care of her.
Dorothy was in deep depression because of the passing of her mother. She was on several different kinds of medication.
They almost had sort of like a mother-daughter relationship. Patricia Newman had spoken to Dorothy around 9 p.m. on the 13th of April. She was to pick her up Sunday morning to run errands and maybe the pharmacy, something of that nature. When she tried to contact her that following morning at 9, she got no answer. She drove down there to check on Dorothy, thinking maybe she was sick or something else had happened. When she realized she wasn't there, I think she was immediately worried because Patricia knew that she did not have the wherewithal or the means to travel anywhere. And at that point, Patricia began to think that she may have met with foul play. She called the police. Police got there and searched the house with no signs of Dorothy being there. They found a half a glass of wine. Not much else really to go on other than no Dorothy. She was missing, had vanished into thin air.
Between their conversation the previous evening and Patricia's 911 call, there's a 12-hour window for the murder.
You can start then making your timeline as to somewhere right after she last talked with Patricia, that starts the clock running.
They pressed Patricia for other details about Dorothy's final day.
It looks like she went to a bank to cash a check.
They discover she was not alone.
She was with a handyman.
We learned that Dorothy was hiring these transient types. She seemed to gravitate toward these people, or they gravitated toward her.
People would learn about the pet cemetery, learn about her, befriend her, and offer to do something for a few dollars.
The timeline shows that he may have been the last person that was with Dorothy Thompson before she disappeared.
Locating the last person to see the deceased alive is necessary because at that point you can establish things like where she was last seen, when she was last seen, what was going on in her world at the time.
A key detail about her transaction at the bank stands out.
She paid him $100.
In 1985, $100 would have been a lot of money. I don't think we made that for cutting grass the entire summer over there.
She was willing to pay him $100 to do handiwork. So it could give motive. It could give an indication that she has plenty of money.
Employing transients is a dangerous game because you have no idea what those people have done in their past. They may be convicted killers, and now they're working in your backyard and they're potentially casing your house out.
She had hired a handyman on the 12th. The day after she hires him, she disappears. So immediately, he became a person of interest.
Detectives are looking for an unknown handyman who received $100 from murder victim Dorothy Thompson within hours of her disappearance.
St. Bernard was very open, and it's an easy place for transients to come in, maybe do a little odd job here and there, make a few dollars.
It made the case very difficult because you had a lot of people that was on that property at different times, doing different things.
A discovery in her home gives them a potential lead.
They found a note in the house, and they came up with the name Kenny Pommier. They found out where he lived, and they were able to find him and brought him in for an interview. He was cooperative. He was forthcoming.
Kenny admits to being the man Dorothy paid $100.
He told him that he had answered an ad in the paper about cutting the grass and doing some repairs around that house. He said he had gone to the bank with her. He brought her to, I think, a grocery store, then brought her home around 4 p.m. And that was it. And that's the last time he saw her. And they knew that Patricia Newman had called Dorothy around 9 p.m. that night.
For Pommier to be the killer, he must have returned to the house after that phone call.
But it was kind of hard to track down where he was at the time that Dorothy disappeared.
Unable to confirm any alibi, they looked deeper into the robbery motive.
They never could really establish that there was anything of real value that she had there other than some jewelry. So to go to that extreme to dispose of this body, to me, was something more sinister. There's only a few reasons people murder, and it's, money, greed, revenge. To me, it's always motive. Motive, then means, then opportunity. But in this case, my first instinct was the motive had to be there. You kind of get that gut feeling about who you're dealing with, and they didn't necessarily rule him out, but I think they were satisfied with what he told them.
Police identify another individual who may have had opportunity in the time frame Dorothy was killed.
Elton Childress was another handyman that worked on Dorothy's property. I think they was in the hospital together, and she kind of befriended him, and Childress wound up working for her.
When you look at his criminal background, he had some violence there. Armed robbery, driving while intoxicated, and drunk in public, and things of that nature. He was a bit of a shady character, a bit of a mysterious kind of person.
People with criminal records, the police would definitely pursue those individuals more aggressively and more rapidly.
Because of the background he had, the way she was killed, somebody wanted her to disappear off the face of the earth. They didn't want her to be found. Somebody that had to have the means and wherewithal to do this.
Brought in for questioning, Childress claims he was nowhere near the house the night Dorothy went missing.
He really had no solid alibis.
So you want to investigate, how is he connected to her? Did he have any motives?
His explanation is tied to a lingering mystery that has surrounded the pet cemetery for decades.
Childress told the investigators that he was looking for hidden treasure on Dorothy's property.
He had heard the rumors from the local people down there that there was treasure buried. There's an urban legend, I guess. Apparently, Dorothy's mother had murdered her ex-husband's new wife in Kansas City. She fled here and basically found this spot in St. Bernard, which is about the farthest place you could go from Kansas City, and opened this pet cemetery and essentially hid out the rest of her life there and was never extradited back to Kansas City to stand charges.
Her ex-husband, a casino owner with alleged ties to the mafia, is rumored to have amassed a small fortune.
There was about $500,000 in cash that went missing, and then he mysteriously died. And that's the treasure that they talk about.
I remember over the years, you would hear stories of kids going in a pet cemetery at nighttime.
Back when we was young, we believed it. Everybody in the community believed it.
Rumors have a way of growing, and a rumor of buried treasure in a pet cemetery, you're going to attract a crowd of people who are going to want to take it.
It seemed like Childress spent most of his time searching for the treasure, digging up the pet graves and not doing much work at all.
His motive could have been that he just got frustrated, he got upset, that he couldn't find the hidden treasure anywhere, and went back over there and lost his temper and killed her.
It throws up a red flag, but then also you gotta wade through it and ask, why would Childress tell an investigator that he was looking for hidden treasure? So you gotta look at it both ways. Is he being honest, or did he just slip up and tell you something?
Remaining adamant, Childress goes on to accuse Dorothy's caregiver.
When Childress was interviewed, he said that Patricia Newman had motive to do this. That she befriended Dorothy because she was trying to take her property.
It's choice land down there. By 1985 standards, it was worth a lot of money, probably $250,000 to $500,000.
Detectives take a harder look at the woman who reported Dorothy missing.
It's common for suspects to try to establish themselves and get on the good side of an investigator and try to be forthcoming with plenty of information and showing that they have a big interest in this case.
They found out that Dorothy had had some children that lived out in California that she was estranged from since they were babies. Dorothy had bequeathed the power of attorney over to Patricia, and that left her in the will.
She was with her, she was close to her, she was one of the individuals who could have benefited if Miss Thompson passed away. Miss Newman may have had some motive for Miss Thompson's death.
Detectives consider if Dorothy Thompson's closest friend, Patricia Newman, killed her to inherit her property.
Patricia could have benefited a lot from Dorothy's passing. She befriended Dorothy. Dorothy had all the trust in her, and she knew a lot about Dorothy and what Dorothy owned at the time.
They revisit Patricia's story regarding Dorothy's disappearance.
With Patricia calling the sheriff's office and asking the sheriff's office to go check the well-being of Dorothy, Patricia possibly was trying to establish an alibi.
Her calling the police might very well be her way of trying to cast suspicion on somebody else and to clear herself.
This, in turn, raises questions about the crime scene.
The manner of the death was extremely violent, but when you see the house itself, it doesn't look like anything had happened. It's difficult to marry those two ideas.
I think the first theory you would assume when you get to the residence and she's not there is that she was maybe killed someplace else. Maybe she was kidnapped.
But it's a common thing for a perpetrator to stage a scene to make it seem like nothing happened.
So I think you have to consider all possibilities. You have to look at everything and everybody that was involved with this woman.
Patricia insists she didn't see or speak to Dorothy after their 9 p.m. call.
Her intentions were genuine toward Dorothy. She said she didn't even want the land. She was just trying to do the right thing for Dorothy Thompson.
The one thing left to consider is if Patricia was physically capable of the crime.
When the body was found in the river in black plastic, and when pounds and pounds of change wrapped around her, I don't know that Patricia would have had the ability to do that.
We're talking about being transported miles away from her residence and then dumped in the river. So Patricia wasn't completely ruled out.
She goes on to suggest yet another potential culprit.
Patricia Newman believed that the Nodiers were involved in Dorothy's disappearance and subsequent death. They were a couple named Brandon Nodier and Bonnie Nodier, who lived there and were also caretakers / groundskeeper.
Brandon was a handyman. He would cut the grass and stuff like that around the residence.
They run Nodier's name through the system.
Nodier had a violent past. He had several run-ins with the law. He had some aggravated offenses against him.
As Brandon lived on the property, he is automatically on Dorothy's timeline for the window of her disappearance.
You want to investigate, did he have any motives? Patricia Newman said that Mr. Nodier was constantly trying to get Miss Thompson to sign over the property to him.
Brandon Nodier wanted that land. He had told people he wanted that land. We learned at some point, Brandon decides that he wants Dorothy to sign a long-term lease for him to operate the property and live there. And apparently she agrees to that.
The elderly are prey to many criminals, and they are easily manipulated into signing away their assets or their fortunes.
For Nodier, the lease isn't enough.
From that point, Brandon Nodier decides that he wants to buy the land.
Maybe he was one of those people looking for the hidden treasures.
Brandon and Bonnie convince her to drive up to an attorney's office in New Orleans who represented Brandon Nodier and sign her property over to them in an act of sale. Supposedly, they were going to pay her $20,000, pay off an existing loan that was on the property, and give her use of the house, which means she could live there for the rest of her life. Patricia said Dorothy, by all accounts, was not lucid when this happened. She was coerced. At one point, Dorothy realizes that she had been duped because there was no $20,000 in her account. The loan was never paid off, and they were kicking her out of the property. And that's when Patricia Newman becomes involved to help her.
What happened was Patricia Newman found out about the property being signed over to Brandon, and she kind of convinced Dorothy to hire an attorney and bring this case to civil court.
So Dorothy immediately files a lawsuit against the Nodiers for fraud and illegal act of sale. It looks like it's a good case for Dorothy because she basically had been ripped off. I mean, she was swindled out of the land.
So they got a court date set up for a judge to hear the case. But a week prior to the case coming up, that's when Dorothy went missing.
So that turned the case on its head once that was found out.
Brandon Nodier has become the latest suspect in the murder of his employer, Dorothy Thompson.
When Brandon was interviewed, he said that Patricia Newman had motive to do this. He said she befriended Dorothy because she was trying to take her property. We didn't believe it.
The circumstantial details are also against him.
Proximity of the lawsuit to the murder is very suspicious, and it would lead investigators to potentially believe that the person who's involved in the lawsuit is involved in the murder.
The challenge for detectives is they have no physical evidence tying Brandon to Dorothy's disappearance.
When you have no evidence, it's a real challenge. You keep going back at what am I missing? Let's find another way. Think outside the box. Let's get from A to B where we have to get to. And oftentimes, it's frustrating.
We were in the process at that time of piecing back some of the information. When in 2009, we received an ominous call from a guy that says he has information about an old murder. So I start talking to this guy, and he says, you know, I know about an old murder, and I can help y'all solve it. Which murder? And he says, the Pet Cemetery murder.
So we asked him if we could meet with him, and he was very reluctant at first to meet with us.
Detectives convince the caller, Juan Garcia, to talk.
I pick him up, and he's a tough guy from the street. I mean, he's not some shrinking violet. He was scared to death. He said he was a friend of Brandon Nodier. And Brandon admitted to him that he had killed her, and he was glad that he did it because she deserved it. He said he never told anyone because he was afraid of Brandon, and they were friends.
Though his story sounds convincing, the timing is suspicious.
We asked him in the interview, what's making you come forward now to talk about this case? And he said he had a premonition that this lady showed up at his bed while he was sleeping, and she had chains on. And it was Miss Thompson. And he said Miss Thompson had asked him to get her justice. And that's why he was there.
He said all sorts of crazy things. But in addition, he knew things about the case that really, some of it was reported in the paper, but not all of it. But it wasn't quite enough. You have to do the job, and you have to investigate every case, regardless of what it looks like on the surface. She was a helpless woman, really. Somebody has to speak for the dead. It's our duty. I felt like I was compelled to solve it. This was mine. So we had to do a lot more.
We came up with the idea that we was gonna go try to talk to Bonnie Nodier. We figured that she would be the one to talk to about this. Many years have gone by, and she may need to get this off her chest.
They speak to Bonnie while Brandon is away.
I told her we had a witness that came forward, and we need to talk to her about it. Said, talk to her attorney. They have nothing to say.
We wanted her to go back and tell him that we were close. We were coming for you, buddy. Our intentions were to force him to make a mistake. That was our only shot at it.
A few weeks go by, we get a call in the office from a female. Said her husband's in jail in St. Tammany Parish, and he wants to talk about a homicide. So myself and Colonel Doran went over to St. Tammany and met with an individual in the jail.
James Tregler had a long criminal history of bombings and all sorts of crazy things. As it turns out, he was a close friend of Brandon, and he worked at the pet cemetery with Brandon. He hasn't seen Brandon in 25 years. He says Brandon pays him a visit at the jail after we talked to Brandon's wife. Brandon says the detectives are snooping around. So whatever happened between you and me a long time ago needs to stay between you and I.
Brandon's visit brings back memories Tregler has been trying to forget.
So he said back in 1985, he was working with Brandon at the pet cemetery. One night, Brandon calls him up out of the blue. He tells him, would you take a ride with me? I need your help with something. So he says they go down to the pet cemetery. And he tells James to stay in the truck. So James does. He said while he's out in the truck, Brandon goes inside of the house.
Then a few minutes go by. He hears Miss Thompson inside the house screaming.
He gets out of the truck and he looks in the door and he sees Brandon on top of Dorothy choking her with her legs flailing. So he yells at Brandon, hey, what are you doing? Stop. Brandon gets up and he tells James to go back in the truck and wait. But during this time, Dorothy comes back to life. She's not dead. And she starts screaming, and Nodie jumps back on her and begins to choke her again. A little while later, Brandon comes out, says, look, you need to help me move the body.
Tregler explains Brandon's visit to the prison decades later was no social call.
Brandon gives him an ominous message. I know where your wife lives, and I know what kind of car she drives. And Brandon told Tregler, if you ever say anything, I'll kill you and your whole family.
James Tregler's jailhouse confession has police convinced Brandon Nodier is guilty of killing Dorothy Thompson.
Tregler maintained all along that he was an unwitting participant in this crime, that he had no idea what Brandon Nodier was going to do, that he only participated because he was scared to death of Brandon.
The word of a convicted criminal is always suspicious. It's always something that police have to check the hard facts and make sure that they validate what the person has said.
So you've got motive, you've got opportunity, you've got them both in spades, but you don't have enough to get a conviction.
They need to corroborate Tregler's story.
Tregler gave us some facts that never was published, some things that nobody else would have known about unless they was at that scene.
Particularly with the plastic, the chains. That information was ever publicized back in '85.
So everything that he said was verified. Well, the St. Bernard Parish District Attorney's Office put it in front of a grand jury, and they indicted Brandon on a second-degree murder charge. So the next time we seen Brandon, we had an arrest warrant for him.
The timeline shows how the events of Dorothy's last day culminated in her violent death.
Dorothy hires Kenneth Pommier to do some work. He brings her to the bank. She pays him, runs some errands. She goes back home. At about 9 p.m., she talks to Patricia Newman. That night, maybe around midnight or so, Nodier arrives at the house with James Tregler. Probably forces his way in. He may still have had a key.
Nodier was probably upset that he wasn't getting the property. He was probably upset that there were proceedings in court which may have prevented him from even trying to steal the property.
He goes in and he attacks Dorothy. A little while later, they wrapped her in the chains. They put her on the back of his pickup truck. And they drove to the Belle Chase ferry landing, which is several miles from the pet cemetery. And they simply threw her in the river.
On April 12, 2012, almost 27 years after the crime, Brandon Nodier awaits his fate.
At the end of the day, the district attorney made a plea bargain. He pled guilty to manslaughter, which is a lesser charge. But he got up in front of court, he admitted what he had done.
To the question of, are you pleading guilty because in fact you are guilty to the killing of Dorothy Thompson? He stood before the judge and said, "Yes, sir, Your Honor."
The plea agreement clearly identifies Nodier as being solely responsible.
Tregler had a lawyer, and with his testimony, he was given immunity, and he was never prosecuted.
Brandon Nodier is sentenced to 10 years in prison.
I don't think he had a guilty conscience. I don't think it weighed on Brandon at all. Because looking at him in court when he pled, he was still really cold. He didn't show no remorse, no nothing.
You know, I had mixed feelings because I thought, you know, we were happy that we were able to solve it. I was disappointed that he didn't get more time. I would have preferred to go to trial. He should be in prison for the rest of his life. But we did the best we could. You know, it's just unfortunate that it took so long to get to it, but I felt good about it.
One element of Dorothy's story remains a mystery.
The hidden treasure. No one's ever found anything in there.
People still search for that money down there. More than likely the money had been spent. That's just my guess. Or someone found it. Well, we'll never know now.